Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the April 30th edition, 2026 of Night with the Experts. My name is Dave Kraft, and I am Director of Nuclear Energy Information Service based in Chicago, Illinois. NEIS has been doing this event for almost 5 years now, and we do this on the last Thursday of each month. It's free, open to the public, so we're glad that you are joining us tonight. Um, it is a real pleasure and honor tonight to have with us someone I've known for decades. And I say that with great appreciation for all the work that he has done for nuclear safety in the country generally, but to advance the safe energy movement as well. And that's Dave Lochbaum. In a minute, my colleague and friend Jan Bodart will be doing an introduction for him. But you have really joined a very, very special Night with the Experts tonight, and we're very thrilled to have David with us after all these years. So at the end, we'll do a little bit of housekeeping and tell you what's going on. And at the present time, I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Jan Boudart. Jan, take it away.
Well, thank you all for coming. Uh, I wonder if we should wait just a minute or two because people are still coming in.
No, we'll start on time and go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Well, I want to introduce David Lochbaum, and uh, you can read his bio in the invitation that you were sent to this meeting. He got a nuclear engineering degree from the University of Tennessee in 1979 and began working in the nuclear power industry. He worked in that for 17 years as a reactor engineer, a shift technical advisor, a system engineer, a licensing engineer, and a consultant. He's now retired, and he's on the board and is the secretary of GRIP, which is Mary Olson's group, and he's the secretary for that group, and C10, which is C10 means Citizens Within 10 Miles of Seabrook, which is a nuclear power plant in New Hampshire. He's on the Decommissioning Oversight Board, which we call the DOB, for iPoint, and he's the technical advisory. He is the technical advisor for that board. He lives in Chattanooga, and anyway, he's had 2 stints with the UCS, and he retired for sure in 2018. Um, and he lives in Chattanooga, where he has taught at the NRC Training Center, which is centered in Chattanooga. But eventually he went to the NRC and retired from there in 2018. And of course, now he's in retirement and he's only doing these other 3 or 4 things that I mentioned. You can read his bio in the invitation that was sent. And if you are interested in it further, write to us and we'll send you the whole thing. So I want now to turn it over to Dave. Dave, you go ahead, please.
First of all, I appreciate working with the Nuclear Energy Information Service. I've called into a number of these programs in the past, and I've learned a lot. I'm able to return some of the information I've gained over the years interfacing with the Nights with the Experts series. I want to talk tonight about Executive Order 14300. I'll refer to it in the future as the order rather than that long name, and why I believe that the issues raised in the order have already been asked of the NRC, and the NRC has already answered them. And there's no reason for the NRC's answer to be different now than it was then. Essentially, the NRC's been there and not done that. The executive order was signed by the president in May of 2025. The order stated, among other things, that the NRC's basis for its radiation protection standards rely on models that lack solid scientific basis and produce irrational results. The order also said that the NRC's reliance on the linear no threshold model, LNT model, for radiation exposure and its companion as low as reasonably achievable, ALARA, which is predicated on the LNT model are flawed. And the NRC and the order also directs the NRC to consider work with the Department of Defense, Department of Energy, and Environmental Protection Agency, EPA. As I'll allude to in further, the NRC has already done that with those agencies and many, many others across the globe. So the NRC has, this question has been asked and answered of the NRC, and the answer is always the LNT and ALARA are the best way to go. First, some background on the linear no threshold model. This is a chart of radiation exposure versus harm risk in terms of excessive cancers over people who didn't receive that amount of radiation. The dots on the right, upper right hand portion of the curve come from the survivors of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and some other cases where people received high levels of radiation. What the NRC, the AEC, and people around the globe have done is take those data points and draw a best line fit between that data and zero, where zero risk obviously means zero exposure means there's zero risk of harm. So they just drew a line from the data they had to zero. So that's the linear no threshold. It's assumed that if you double the amount of radiation exposure, you double the risk of harm. Likewise, if you cut the radiation exposure in half, then you reduce the risk by 50%. With that in mind, the NRC's regulations still allow radiation exposures to workers and the public. The limit for workers who are over 18 years of age is 5 rem per year. The limits for nuclear workers under 18 years old, or for declared pregnant women, is 1/10 of that, half a rem per year. Declared pregnant woman means that a female nuclear worker who is pregnant doesn't have to tell management that she's pregnant, and resulting in this lower radiation exposure applied to her condition. And the thought there was some female workers might not want to do that because that would pull them off of jobs where they might get overtime pay or promotions or other things. So it's up to the individual woman to declare or not the pregnancy. The last one for members of the public, it's 0.1, 1/10 of a rem per year, or 1/50th of what old nuclear workers can receive. The other term that the executive order doesn't like is a low is reasonably achievable. That's a federal regulation that says you can't just go by the permissible radiation limits. When you can take reasonable steps to reduce the radiation exposure even further, as long as they're cost effective, you must do it. And those methods to reduce radiation exposure generally involve time, distance, and shielding. You reduce the amount of time individuals are exposed to radiation, or you increase the distance between a radioactive source and individuals, or you put some shielding between the radioactive source and individuals. And if it's cost effective, you're required to do it. It's not noted in the regulation that the plant owners do the cost calculation. So anyway, the reason I think the issues in the order have already been asked is that in February of 2015, the NRC received 3 petitions for rulemaking that sought to revise the agency's radiation protection standards, relax them basically. The February 9th petition sought elimination of ALARA and the elimination of radiation protection limits below the 5 rem. It wanted to treat all individuals, anytime, any place at 5 rem per year. That petition also asked, quote, why deprive the public of the benefits of low dose radiation? I call that up because I'll come back to that point a little bit later, and why the public may actually be deprived of the benefits. The other 2 petitions basically sought the same thing: elimination of ALARA and the use of the linear no threshold model. And they wanted to basically bump everything up to the 5 rem per year for adult nuclear workers. And the February 24th petition said that even proposed that radiation hormesis, that exposures of low-level radiation help or beneficial. The reason I think that those issues have been answered is because in a 52-page document issued by the NRC in August of 2021, the NRC denied all 3 petitions. The reason I cite the length of it is, and I don't cite all the things, page after page in the NRC's denial, they cite reasons why it's not a good idea to abandon LNT and ALARA. The NRC cited EPA, National Cancer Institute, National Academy of Sciences, International Council on Radiation Protection, and many other groups around the world, around the United States, around the world, that basically say LNT and ALARA are the best way to protect workers and the public. And if you look at some of the things the NRC said, was in absence of convincing evidence that there's a dose threshold or that low levels of radiation are beneficial, we believe LNT and ALARA are the best protection standards. And the NRC is not alone in reaching that conclusion. And I'll get to that in just a second. The NRC's denial recognized that there are people on both sides of the debate, but they basically cited a lot of federal and international agencies that support the LNT use. National Academy of Sciences, National Council on Radiation Protection, International Council on Radiation Protection, even the International Atomic Energy Agency. All of those continue. And by the way, none of those 4 would be mistaken for Greenpeace. The NRC cited the Biological Effects of Ionizing Radiation 7 report issued in 2006, says the preponderance of information says there will be risk even at low doses. And there's no reason to assume there's a dose threshold below the risk of is low. The NRC's denial also cited a National Cancer Institute response that said that critiqued many of the studies that were relied on in those 3 petitions. In National Cancer Institute stated, quote, in some cases, analyses published many years ago are cited even when more analyses based on current follow-up information of the same populations, often with improved dose estimates, do not support the claims, end quote. So basically, the petitions were relying on outdated, obsolete, no longer vogue studies to support their hypotheses. And again, rather than relying on new science, the PRM cited old and obsolete science. The order directed the NRC to seek input from the Environmental Protection Agency. The NRC has already done that. The EPA provided the NRC with its evaluation of the 3 petitions from 2015. The EPA told the NRC that relying on the LNT model is the best way to address radiation protection measures. In the last paragraph, the EPA told the NRC in writing that the PRMs were, quote, poorly supported and highly speculative, end quote. Wikipedia basically classifies that in the junk science category. I wouldn't deny that. Again, in the answered category, to support the fact that the NRC's been there and done that, somebody called the EPA's Office of the Inspector General's hotline and alleged that EPA was not using the best available science and was relying on the LNT to guide its radiation protection guidance. The NRC's Inspector General, the EPA's Inspector General investigated this allegation, and on January 6th, 2022, reported that EPA's use of the LNT relies on external organizations, even the Department of Energy. So there's another agency that the order addressed the NRC to consult. DOE's already been there and provided that input. So it's not, the Inspector General for the EPA did not find that EPA, NRC et al. Were using bad science to support overly conservative radiation protection standards. Again, another document that the NRC cited in denying the 3 petition was the National Academy of Science. No, this came out later. I'm sorry, this is June of 2022. This is a National Academy study in response to a request from the U.S. Congress about low exposures on environmental and occupational exposures or radiation. And what was eye-opening to me was the last paragraph where the National Academy said that there's also increasing evidence that low dose radiation exposure may be associated with non-cancer health outcomes, such as cardiovascular disease, neurological disorders, immune dysfunction, and cataracts, end quote. The radiation exposures themselves, as I'll get to in just a second, are bad enough and are causing quite a bit of harm, over $33 billion of harm to Americans. So, and if there's even more things that low dose radiation exposure causes, that cost is going to go up, not down. And then turn to what would the order, if the NRC adopted the relaxed regulations guidance mandated by the order, what would be the consequence? The radiation exposure limits for workers under 18 and pregnant women would be increased by a factor of 10. Thus, if 10 persons were harmed by exposures now, 100 persons would be harmed at the relaxed limits. And as for the members of the public, they would be increased by a factor of 50. So if 10 members of the public are being harmed by exposures now, 500 members of the public would be harmed by exposure to, and we don't get to pick which 500 get harmed. So what would the financial cost be from the increased harm? To answer that question, I looked at the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act that was passed in 1990 that compensates workers at the Nevada test site and members of the public living downwind in Nevada, Utah, and Arizona of atomic above ground and below ground testing at the Nevada test site. Through July of 2024, that act had paid out more than $2.5 billion to settle nearly 42,000 claims. 10 years later, the Energy Employee Occupational Illness Compensation Program Act, that just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? Compensated workers at nuclear weapons facilities for harm from radiation exposure. Through January of 2026, that act had paid out more than $31 billion to nearly 152,000 workers. It is bad. It not only sounds bad, it is bad. But making it even worse, the United States Congress has reported that studies have shown that more than 98% of the radiation-induced cancers within a nuclear weapons complex occurred at dose levels below the existing safe thresholds. So it's not that the existing radiation protection standpoints are overly conservative. They are basically, this date, $33 billion suggests that they're not good now and need to be lowered, not raised. And this goes back to the point earlier where one of the petitions said that it's depriving the public of benefits of low dose. And this might explain it. The public got higher dose rates, they would get harmed and they would be eligible for this compensation. But I think there's better ways for Americans to get money than through radiation harm. To see whether the NRC's denial of those three petitions was an aberration or whether it was consistent with how the NRC handles other petitions received, I looked at petitions decided upon by the NRC between 2015, when the petitions were submitted, and 2021, when the NRC decided on those three. And I cite some of those many studies to show that the NRC's action on those three petitions was consistent with its policy and practices. The first example I cite here is from October of 2021. A NuScale, which is a reactor vendor, sought revisions to the regulations on reactor vessel embrittlement. The NRC reported that NuScale had relied on an overly conservative prediction that is not correct for the 40-year case, and that it provided no additional information to demonstrate that the current regulations are overly conservative. You don't provide new information, you don't get changed regulations. The second one was one of my petitions that I worked with Paul Gunter of Beyond Nuclear, seeking better regulations for fire protection measures when they're out of service. The NRC denied that petition because they claimed that we didn't provide any significant new information that warranted a change to the existing regulations. Likewise, in 2018, the NRC denied a petition from the National Resources Defense Council seeking to compel plant owners to take steps following Fukushima to address seismic and flooding hazards every 10 years because things change. As new information becomes known about those hazards, NRDC sought for owners to evaluate that and see if that needed to change their defenses against those hazards. The NRC said no, it was going to be doing that. So basically, it was the NRC's IOU trumped NRDC's facts, and it was denied. March of 2018, the NRC denied a petition from C10 about the alkali silica reaction degradation at Seabrook because they said that the existing regulatory program is sufficient, even though they funded the National Institute of Standards and Technology to study this problem because it was a new problem and it wasn't fully understood. But NRC determined that C10 failed to provide any new information that hadn't already been considered by the NRC in addressing ASR at this plant. The NRC in 2015-2016 denied 2 petitions involving spent fuel storage, again for reasons because they didn't provide new information that warranted a change to the existing regulatory structure. There was also the last one, I think, is one of the most significant of the examples I reviewed. In April of 2015, the NRC denied a petition submitted by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts about spent fuel storage at Pilgrim. The NRC's denial was based on that petition was essentially identical to an earlier one also submitted by the Commonwealth on a very similar issue. The NRC denied the latter petition because it said it was no significant new information from the earlier one. They denied it the first time, and because no new information was submitted, they denied it again. I did this research not only to ensure myself that the NRC's denial of the 3 petitions in 2021 was consistent with how they did things, but also because I wanted to assemble a basis should the NRC approve relaxing the regulatory requirements standards now in response to the order. Basically, because for decades, they've maintained that LNT and ALARA are the best way to protect workers and the public. And they answered that as recently as 2021, and new information has become available. If they were now to relax those regulations, I think this set of how they've handled other issues where questions have been asked and answered and no new information has been provided, if the NRC were to relax its regulations now in response to the order, to me, I think it makes a great case for the NRC acted arbitrarily and capriciously. I'm not a lawyer, but I've seen those words used. I think this matches that. So I think there'd be a chance this information would provide a basis for appealing the NRC's decision, should they make a mistake, to a court to try to get the court to make the NRC go back and make it right. I'm hopeful, since the NRC's denied this before, the request to relax the regulations, that they'll find that same answer again now, since they've done over and over and over again for so many decades, or so many times, to now change their policy just because pressure from the White House would be political science, not real science. So I'm hoping they don't make that mistake. But I'm also covering my bets in case they do make the mistake by this kind of research, which shows, they're deviating from their standard practices, policies, and procedures in order to make that mistake. So as far as why I think this issue has been asked and answered, in May of 2025, the order basically asked the NRC to relax its radiation protections, just as the 3 petitions for rulemaking had done in February 2015. No new science or justification was provided. The only differences between then and now are the dates and the return address. Because the ask in 2015 and the ask now in 2025 are essentially identical, the answer needs to be the same. No, don't do it. But I'm not overly confident that the NRC's, I think one of the problems, the NRC sees a lot like a jellyfish. They seem to lack a spine. So I think I'm a little worried that they'll ignore science, they'll ignore past practices, they'll ignore their 52-page document from 2021 and say yes this time. And if they do and they get away with it, as I showed earlier, a lot of Americans are going to pay a high price for that mistake. And we don't need to go through another human radiations experiment as we did after World War II. We know enough now to avoid that mistake. Didn't take all the time that Jan and Dave allotted to me, but I'd now be glad to answer any questions or hear any comments from people, if that's okay.
Thank you, David. And if you would stop your share screen, we'll get into the Q&A in a minute. A little bit of housekeeping on how we proceed next, and then we'll get right into it. The next portion is really up to you, the participants, to make this happen. We set this up so you have an opportunity to dialogue and ask questions of our experts and amongst each other. And I would remind everyone that our Night with the Experts programs are taped. If you do not want to be recorded, make sure you turn your camera off, and you can ask your question just using your microphone. That's quite all right. We will make the tapes available shortly on YouTube, so you can look forward to that in the future. And we will also save the chat information and send it out to participants. So on that note, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Jan Budart, who will be giving you the instructions for the next portion of tonight's sessions. I will now open the chat as well. So, Jan, are you there? You're up.
I'm not sure what's going on here. There's two of
Okay,
me.
you're good. You're good.
But
Just keep
one
talking.
of them, it looks like my hand is up, and it's not.
That's all right, Jan. Just you're on.
Okay, so we're going to have the Q&A now, and we request that you ask, when you ask a question, that you ask only one follow-up, and Dave is, he will answer one follow-up, and then if you have further questions, you can raise your hand and be put on the stack, and if there's time left at the end, you can ask your question. You can also put your question in the chat and raise your hand like this, and I will watch for you if I can. So I'll try to keep an order of who raised their hands first or who put their question in the chat first. And I think Dave will help me track the chat in case people don't like to raise their hands or whatever. Some people just put their questions in the chat, period, and that's how they do it. So right now, I see 3 hands, so we're going to go in order. And oh, I had one more item. If you want to make a comment instead of a question, you have 3 minutes for a comment if you don't have a question. So we're starting out with Diane, and then we go to Connie and Alan. So go ahead, Diane, and ask your question, please.
Hi, Dave. Thank you. That was really great summary of what we're facing here. I have a concern that as they try to do away with the idea of LNT, no threshold, in other words, they try to claim there's a threshold, that they may even retain the LNT, but that they're really also trying to push for a determinant level. That's one of the phrases in the executive order. And then that would result in a clearance level or a level below which you don't have to regulate, and radioactive waste and materials could go into regular garbage and recycling and all of that. I wanted you to comment on that. And then I have another question on a different proposed rule change, which has a comment deadline of May 11th, I believe. It has to do with reducing regulatory controls over category 1 and 2 material. And could you tell us what category 1 and 2 material is? It looked like it's pretty intensely radioactive, and maybe irradiated fuel, spent fuel is in category 1. So that's what I wanted to ask.
Well, on the first point, the NRC's denial of those 3 petitions kind of addressed the issue. They went through and showed there's not enough data to support a no threshold theory. And they got input from NCI and National Academy of Sciences. So to try to impose one in the absence of data wouldn't be impossible, but would be wrong. In addition, I don't cite it in the slides, but the NRC about a decade ago had tasked the National Academy of Science to look at low levels of radiation around operating plants to see if there's harm. NAS did the phase 1 study. When it came to do the phase 2 study, it was actually doing the outline, the project that NAS had studied. The NRC stopped funding that and said, we know enough now to know that the radiation protection standards are sound. There's no reason to spend a lot of money to reconfirm that. So they basically, all the data they have and they cited said that there's no data available to support relaxing the regulations. So how could you relax the regulations based on no data? That seems like a flimsy stance. So as far as the class 1 and class 2, I know it's nasty stuff. I just don't know the definition of how nasty. I never, that was never my assignment
Okay,
during my work in the industry.
thanks.
Okay, Connie, go ahead, please.
I just have one procedural question and then another question. And thank you so much for this. The procedural question is, how will the slides be available, and what about the links? There were a lot of links. I'm familiar with the petitions that were filed in 2015 and the NRC denial, but there were other links that appeared to be useful.
Yeah,
Depending what
the
Go
links
ahead.
were all embedded into the PowerPoint slides, so clicking on them should call up the source document. That
Okay.
was one of the things I tried to do to help people, if they submit comments on the NRC's proposed rulemaking, they could not just rely on my slides, but they go back to the source document. So, and
Okay.
I can email you that slide deck. I think it's uploaded on NEIS or GRIP's website or GRIP's website.
Okay. And the other thing, I don't know how to phrase this exactly. You approach this from the standpoint of NRC has looked at this. They looked at the 3 petitions in 2015 for 6 years. They did write a comprehensive denial. And that should end the discussion, because the NRC has in fact ended it. And an organization like GRIP, for example, approaches this more from the biological aspects of why we need LNT and ALARA. Would you say that, all of this is dependent on what the NRC comes out with as a draft rule, but would you say that if they want to reduce LNT and ALARA, or eliminate it completely, would you say that the comment approach should include both the past stuff that the NRC has done and the health and biological aspects, or one or the other would be more effective?
I would recommend using as much, not the shotgun approach, but using as much evidence as you can, because there are some really good people working with the NRC, and when they find somebody that supports their position, they're more likely to take it. NRC doesn't like to go out on a limb, NRC staffers. So if they can cite some comment or something like that they agree with, and they can put forth as, look, it's not just me, here's these others. So the more comments they receive of a different nature, the more likely you are to find resonance with people within NRC that want to do the right thing and are looking for the means to do it. So if you can, I'd try to touch as many bases as possible to get as many allies as possible.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dave. And I didn't say how much I appreciate the slides that you gave and the explanation that you gave. It's the details that you provided us are very, very important. And so I want to go back to the stack because it's kind of complicated. Uh, these people are on the stack. Alan, and then Kathy Barnes put her question in the chat, and I'm going to read it or have her read it. Then James Lampert, I want him to know that I've seen his hand. He's going to get called on. And the other person who's named Jan Bodart is Stephen Sondheim because he used my registration to get into the meeting, and so he's got my name up. And then David Kraft. So the stack now is Alan, Kathy Barnes, James Lampert, Stephen Sondheim, and David Kraft.
And
So
Jan,
go ahead, Alan. Oh, go
Jan,
ahead.
I just want to do a housekeeping thing before we proceed. This is a very well-attended session tonight.
Yes.
There's 67 of you here.
Right.
But we can only see 6 of you at a time. So unless you use the raise hand button down on the bottom of your screen where it says react, we only have a 1 in 11 chance to see if you're raising your hand on your screen. So please use the button as the first means of trying to get our attention. It's even worse in the chat because we can only see about 2 or 3 chats at a time. So your odds are reduced to about 1 in 22 to 1 in 23 of getting your questions answered.
Well, I can see 40. I can see 49 people at a time. I can see 49 people at a time.
Okay, so we're going to move on to the next asker.
Yeah, okay. Alan, you go ahead, please.
Okay, thanks so much indeed. I have the US NRC web page in front of me. And it says the NRC was created as an independent agency by Congress in 1974 to ensure the safe use of radioactive materials for beneficial civilian purposes while protecting people and the environment. So I guess my question is, what authority does the president have essentially for doing what he's trying to do? And I'm thinking particularly of his effort to turn the NRC from being a safe nuclear moderating or monitoring agency to a nuclear marketing agency.
Well, he has the authority to direct him. The NRC, all he did was tell the NRC to, look at this, revisit this issue. It's based on a flawed model. Basically, he asked the same thing that was asked in the 3 petitions for rulemaking. Basically he's asking the NRC to initiate a rulemaking process to see if the regulations need to be revised. The NRC has the authority to say no, as they did for the 3 petitions. So I'm hopeful that the NRC will exercise that authority and protect the environment and the public as their task under the Energy Reorganization Act.
Oh, okay, but isn't Trump also trying to turn the agency into a marketing agency?
Not directly. Some of the other executive orders have to speed up the licensing process, to take other measures that would benefit the nuclear industry, but actually the Department of Energy, if you look at what the Department of Energy is doing, they're doing more of the marketing. They're giving money for new reactor studies. They're doing money to subsidize the zombie reactor restarts and so on. So they're basically the marketing component. The NRC's, by that act, is the regulatory agency, although he is getting pressure to do things quicker, which could be take shortcuts on safety. But the biggest lever on the NRC is Congress. Congress sets the NRC's budget, and that has whoever controls your purse strings controls what you do and what you don't do. So Congress, in my experience, has been the bigger lever or the bigger pressure, and also in some cases the bigger ally when you get them to believe you. But right now that's not the case.
Okay, thank you, Dave. I'm going to read Kathy Barnes' question unless she wants to. Kathy, do you want to step up and read your question, or shall I do it?
You can read it. Thank you.
I'm concerned about medical radiation use. When a patient gets dental x-rays, mammograms, and CT scans, there is no dosage data. Isn't it possible the patient is receiving too much radiation? When will there be accountability for medical radiation dose on health, such as triggering cancers, etc.?
It's a good question. I don't fully know the answer to that. I know that when Commissioner Greta Dykes was on the commission, that was one of her concerns, that medical uses of radiation or ionizing radiation wasn't being properly overseen by the state and the NRC. She's long gone from the commission, but that was one of her. But it was an issue that I don't have an expertise in that area, so I couldn't challenge or support Commissioner Dykes' efforts because I just didn't know enough. I was an uninformed voice. I believe there's an issue there. In the report I did that led to this ask and answer thing, there was a rulemaking that was done by the NRC recently where doctors asked for the NRC to relax their radiation protection standards for the public for families of people receiving radiation studies because the patients became radioactive and the families, if they visited them, could only stay a short time before they had to leave because they reached the limit. That rulemaking was approved by the NRC that allowed, under certain circumstances, family members to meet with radioactive patients because the radioactive patients needed that solace and that comfort. And I cited that because that was an example where rather than an across the boards, raise everything up to 5 rem for anyone, any place. If there's a specific case where it's warranted, then approve that. Don't do it across the board. Make sure you have the justification and you have the controls in place to ensure that that doesn't produce undue harm. So that's in a separate report I've done on ask and answered. I can get that out there.
Oh, could you give us the name of that person again?
The person?
Yeah, the person who was concerned about.
It was a doctor, and I forget the doctor's name, but it was at the University of Cincinnati Medical Center or medical facility that submitted the petition.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay, the next person on my list is James Lampert. And so James, because you're on my list next, I'm going to call on you next. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Dave, as I understand the president's order, one of its major bases with which you can clearly disagree was that relaxing the standard would have a great benefit to our society. The NRC has for years used a cost-benefit analysis to justify, frankly, almost, you pick your percentage, 99 and 44/100, to deny things. I guess I have two kind of questions that come out of there. If I understood your graph on the LNT, there is no data that goes down anywhere near to zero to support it, isn't it? It's just an extension of the line. But is there data to support that? And has anybody run a cost-benefit analysis? And finally, if the NRC were to change its tack and apply a cost-benefit analysis to lowering the standard, what's the likely outcome?
Well, I agree with the premise you put. The petitions from 2015 said the costs of complying with LNT and ALARA radiation protection standards are enormous and uncalculable. So the harm that allegedly results from having to meet these standards, the industry just says it's too large, don't do it. As far as the cost, again, I go back to the 2 acts of Congress where downwinders and nuclear workers are getting compensated, and 98% of that harm resulted from doses below the permissible levels. So that I don't know what the costs are, but they seem to be in the $1 billion plus ballpark. And also, the NRC was going to do a study about low-level dose around nuclear facilities, and they decided not to fund that. So if you're going to do that, you need to go out and do the study, get the science, get the data, and if it supports that, do it. If it doesn't, don't do it.
Here's hoping.
Yeah, that's why I did the study. That's why I did the research, because I'm not that naive.
Okay. Okay, so I changed the name. It is actually Stephen Sondheim and not me. And so I'm calling on Stephen next. Steve, you go ahead and ask your question, please. Unmute. Oh, you did. Steve, you have to unmute.
Yeah. Sorry about misrepresenting you, Jan. I just couldn't get on, so I used yours. And
Okay.
hi, Dave. Gosh, I met you in Chattanooga many, many years ago. I appreciate you and your dry humor. The real question I have is, could anybody actually work in the nuclear industry if the standard, and I'm for it, but if the standard were lowered as much as we're talking about lowering it, would they even be allowed to work? And the other part of that is, if there were compensation for anybody harmed, what the heck would those costs be? Thank you.
Well, first of all, the petitions and the executive order seek to raise the standards up to the level for nuclear workers over the age of 18, not lower. They didn't look at going the other direction and dropping it down to what the members of the public are. They want to bring the members of the public, pregnant women, and workers under 18 up to the workers over 18 existing limit. Kind of what was happening in Japan after Fukushima. For all the people living around, the public living around the plant, they just made them all nuclear workers and applied the higher limit to their exposures. As far as the exposures or the cost, I looked at a number of studies that once ALARA and LNT were put in place, the industry tried to meet those, or didn't try, they sought to meet those regulatory protection measures. And by doing so, they cleaned up their plants, which lowered their operating costs because piping wasn't as contaminated as it was before. They didn't have as many fuel leakers as they did before. That reduced the exposures to workers. It also reduced their operating costs because they didn't have to get rid of as much radioactive waste as they did in the old days. So they're actually saving money complying to the regulations, but they won't let you know that because that hurts their feelings.
Wow, thank you. Just another little question here. How are they saying that radiation is good for people? I don't get that. Are they saying it's good for people health-wise or finance-wise? What are they saying?
They're basically the argument, as I understand it, is that it's kind of like when you get a vaccine, you get a little bit dose of the thing, and that builds up the body's immunity to harmful effects. I have not seen a study that basically shows that's the way it works for radiation exposures. And I've seen studies that suggest the opposite. You know, in that slides, the NAS or the NRC's denial of the 3 petitions, agency after agency shot down that there is a dose threshold or the fact that it's good for you. But there are proponents of nuclear power that they're one-trick ponies. Anywhere they can show up and make that claim, they'll do so.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. The next, this was the concept of hormesis that you can look up, Stephen. A lot of people believe that, and it's just nuts. Okay, so David Kraft, I had you on the list. Are you wanting to ask a question?
All right, I'll ask a quickie. It gets back to the cost, and I want to tap into your experience, your days at the NRC and in the industry. We hear the term quite a bit of doing activities if they're cost effective. What is the method used to determine what actually is cost effective or not, based on your experiences, both with the industry and with the NRC?
Well, basically, my experience has been if you're looking at solving some problem, you generally come up with an array of 2 or 3 options that purport to solve that problem, fix that problem. You then do a cost benefit to say, you know, they don't have equal cost, which is the best way to solve that problem. And it may not be the lowest cost, because if the lowest cost one requires you to fix it again in 5 years, you may go for a more durable fix that allows you to, you know, it's higher cost initially, but you don't have recurring costs down the road. So you basically try to look at those factors and come up with the best. When I worked for the Tennessee Valley Authority here in Chattanooga, I did a cost benefit study for when I was working at Browns Ferry. My bosses laughed at me because I said, we work for TVA. We don't care about what it costs. So that wasn't a good place to gain that experience.
Okay. Next on my list is Mary Lampert. I think she raised her hand and then lowered it and raised it again. Go ahead, Mary. Oh, you just put yourself on mute. You went backwards. Oh, there you go.
Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes, you had mentioned, Dave, that EPA, DOE had not joined the bandwagon at one point back in 15 for getting rid of LNT. Seeing as though we're in the third renaissance, and people love company, our EPA, DOE, and what international organizations are following along with Trump's orders, or starting to talk about, well, we have second thoughts on LNT, ALARA, etc. Is this a horde mentality? And if so, what groups?
I'm not aware of any. I haven't checked with Greenland. Greenland might have reconsidered, but I'm not aware of any. There are many international, like Germany and France, where studies have shown that there are higher leukemia, childhood leukemias around the facilities. And so I don't know of any. I can't say there aren't any. I'm just not aware of any that are jumping on Trump's bandwagon. As far as EPA and DOE and the others that rejected the petitions in 2015 per the NRC, if they were to change their positions now and support relaxing the regulations, you rely on something that Arnie Gunderson often said: "Were you lying then, or are you lying now?"
Good point. And I also mentioned in Massachusetts, for a settlement regarding decommissioning the Pilgrim Station, the state insisted on lowering to 10 millirem for the cleanup standard.
Indian Point or state of New York got the same thing for Indian Point through an agreement.
Right. And so I think that's an example where states, once educated, are going in the opposite direction of the Trump order, which is just
That's a good point. That's a good point, because the NRC has a lot of agreement states. And if the agreement states were to weigh in and say, no, we don't want to do that, because we would pick up the tab for members of the public in our state harmed by this, kind of like the smoking campaigns where the attorney generals got involved. So that may be a source of allies for this fight as well.
Good, thanks.
Okay, thank you. And the next person is Kristen Schrader Fischetta. I wish that you would introduce yourself, because you've been coming to our Night with the Experts, and Kirsten is a person of note in her own right, and I often quote her paper, just basically that if you leave out various steps in the fuel chain, you can get the idea that nuclear power is carbon free, but you got to leave out steps in how it's created. That's just really a general. But anyway, Kristen, would you please answer or ask?
Yeah, just first I want to thank Dave. Thank you, Jan. I want to thank Dave. Your comments have simply always been spot on and clear and succinct and just extraordinarily helpful. So
appreciate that.
On behalf of millions of people, I'd just like to thank you for the way you've spent your life. I used to tell my students, if I wanted to make a lot of money, I wouldn't be a professor. Well, you can really say that of people doing public interest work. So you've really been a force for good. So thank you.
I appreciate that. And to be honest, one of the reasons that it kept me going was working with people like Dave Kraft and Nice, Mary Lampert, and the activists who are doing it on their own time.
Right.
So I figured I couldn't find a better use of my time than helping them fight those campaigns.
I know. It's like, where are you going to find such an incredible group of people? Well, that said, just two quick comments. The main guy who's been talking about these hormetic effects, a variety of things, including ionizing radiation, is Ed Calabrese, and I've gotten in journal battles with him over hormesis. And essentially, just so people know, what he's saying is that so long as there's at least one beneficial allegedly beneficial effect of some toxin, and we'll include the hazard of radiation in there. As long as there's one beneficial effect, like your fingernails going longer or your sperm count increasing, just whatever wacko thing. They exclude net beneficial effects and just say, and they're really equivocating, and they say if you have one beneficial effect, that's all they can talk about. They can never talk about net beneficial, and they're not even as good as the vaccination. So the vaccination grants them really too much because they can't come up, at least in the journals, with more than something trivial. But my question was that the Beer report was very, very wise, and so much of it has turned out to be true, and even more true than it was realized at the time. But the question is, why do so many people use epidemiological standards? The LNT curve, where, the one end, we don't have good epi data, so we simply extrapolate down to lower doses. Because it seems to me there's something stronger, and it's right in the Beer report from more than 20 years ago. And it's that we know that there's no dose of ionizing radiation that doesn't cause particle tracks through the cell. And anytime you've got a particle bumping around into your cells and damaging DNA, you've got something with the potential to cause cancer. We now know less than a millisievert of radiation dose. 1 millisievert can increase double-strand DNA breaks. Double-strand DNA breaks are the primary cause of cancer. And moreover, there's no dose of radiation, 1 millisievert or below. There's no dose of ionizing radiation that at which double-strand breaks can be reliably repaired. So why don't people use that DNA evidence? Because it's just sort of incontrovertible. And it's more secure than the epi, and it's in beer. It's always puzzled me.
I don't know. I'm not sure I'm the right person to fully answer that question, but my take on it is that one of the problems in an earlier question about there's no data at the low end of the LNT curve, nuclear workers are given radiation badges that record how much radiation exposure they receive. Members of the public living around plants don't receive that. So the low levels of radiation that they're getting from the releases from nuclear plants are estimated as what the dose is to.
Right.
And it's estimated by the plant owner.
Right.
Curious. So that's why there's not a lot of data, because the industry, the federal government doesn't badge members of the public to know how much dose they're receiving. So with no data, you can't get low dose radiation effects because nobody collects it. It's not. And I think one of the mistakes is they should confirm their estimates of what members of the public are getting around Indian Point and Zion and Diablo Canyon and these various plants, rather than just guessing.
Yes, but the point is, if even one particle has been showed through electron microscopy, if even one particle can damage DNA, then you don't need epi data. If there's all this. So that's my question, really. We may not have epidemiological data, but we've got biological data from real-time microscopes.
If I was wearing a nuclear industry hat, I would point out that there's no way to confirm whether that particle that caused that damage came from my nuclear power plant or came from natural background, a tritium that's in the atmosphere and so on. So even if that can be shown with a microscope, there's no license tag on that particle, so it's hard to prove where it came from. And if I was the industry, I'm going to say it's not coming from my plant.
But it doesn't matter, because we know background radiation is harmful. And so if they're adding to it at the same level of magnitude, it really doesn't matter. Besides, it's cumulative. So I've just been puzzled, because it seems that so many people play their game, which ignores the most powerful biological data. But I don't want to take any more time. But again, thank you for joining.
That was a great point. I I'll do some more work on that because that's an excellent point. I just hadn't considered, so I'll go back and look at it.
I think Mary Lampert has something she just wants to say about this.
Yeah, a study being done around New England plants by the Harvard School of Public Health, Petros Koutrakis, and others are also going to include collecting biological data from people through urine and blood samples to be able to determine what these neighbors have can show biologically, and at the same time doing microcalciphon, doing dust and soil samples in their house and neighborhood to be able to point out reactor radionuclides in their house and property. So that is something that's going on, but it's very slow and very much
Yeah,
time.
these things take a lot of time. They're not just instant. Did you have anything else you want to say, Dave, or should we go on to the next question?
You can go on. Thank you.
Okay, so there's people who I want to call on to make comments that haven't raised their hands, but Susan has her hand raised, and she's another person that in her own right, she deserves to be introduced to this audience. So I'm going to let Susan talk, and I hope or ask a question, and I hope you'll take the time to tell us a little bit about who you are and what you have been doing.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you. The question I want to ask before I get into what I do, I'm around Indian Point and I've been focused on nuclear emissions and nuclear heat waste. But my question to Dave on this issue, really helpful this session, is you're talking about that you've made 3 petitions. They've all been denied. We all, probably many of us here know that, the NRC standardly denies every petition that's ever made under their structured legal internal policy. So my question is, how do we take I don't want to be a pessimist here, but I'm being a realist. They're going to go ahead and approve probably this horrible change. We hope not, but it's probably likely. Even if we put in comments, which I think we probably need to create a record. But how do we challenge this? Because if we just keep going through the NRC internal court system, we get nowhere. So is there any way that you can think of that we can challenge this in a different way?
Well, I mentioned earlier that I wasn't that familiar with the campaign on smoking and cigarettes that about 20 years ago. Alka Piersma, who was on Representative Kucinich's staff at the time, was very good at getting traction on that issue. But I think because if this rulemaking goes through, or if the order gets implemented the way it's structured, there's likely to be increased harm to members of the public in states with operating nuclear facilities. So, and the cost of that would be picked up in part by the states or the insurers. So it looks to me like not approaching the NRC, because that's a steep slope, but perhaps trying to get states involved, or like the 2 federal acts, RECA and the Energy Employees Act, $33 billion. Maybe members of Congress who would rather spend that $33 billion instead of for people that are harmed or killed by radiation on better things. Maybe they might be interested in informing the NRC, don't get this wrong. Unfortunately, Senator Markey's a great ally, but there's not that many good allies around these days. But that might be an option, recognizing the NRC's not the strongest ally in this one.
There is a new decommissioning bill that is being floated by Markey and Sanders and Warren and I believe Gillibrand. I'm wondering whether it might make sense to see if we could tie this into that bill, because it's out there already.
I haven't seen that bill, but that might be a good strategy, because that Alka Piersma was, when I worked for UCS, was my go-to strategist on the congressional level. He would come up, and through Mary Olson, we've tried to contact Alka to see if he might still provide input on this issue. So, but I think that might be a good ploy. And Senators Markey, the senators listed have been strong allies in the past. And the other thing, I sometimes say the NRC is the Nielsen Ratings Commission. When they start seeing some headlines and some media coverage, they tend to get that spine that I said earlier were missing.
Okay, I'll share the information. I'll try to share the information about the bill in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
That everyone can have. Okay, thank you.
Okay, we have to skip and call on Mary Olson because she's having to leave. And so I had Mary down for a 3-minute comment, but anyway, she put a comment in the chat, and now I want to give her a chance to say something. So Mary Olson, please go ahead.
I will be brief. Kristen, you know exactly what you're talking about, and we're getting more and more information. Mary Lampert's report that the Chan School of Public Health at Harvard is going after individual biological samples is yet an addition to a larger push on multiple fronts to use biomarkers rather than any sort of unit. Measuring radiation with a unit assumes that it's like an inch or a pound. And my work, amongst others, have shown that it matters who receives a dose of radiation and exposure of radiation. And if you're doing epidemiology with large numbers of people, you can show that the outcome is different if you're a child versus an adult. It's different if you're a boy child than a girl child. Both of them have more harm per unit of dose than do either sex of adults. But in every age category, if you're female, you're at higher risk of having a cancer outcome than any similar aged male across birth to 80 years. So it matters who you are as you're exposed. We now know there's individual genomes that have higher risk for different parts of the cancer exposure spectrum. So in the past, we wanted to take on radiation standards. We were uniformly told not to do it because it would open Pandora's box and the industry would gang up and we would lose and the standards would only get worse. So we didn't open them, but now they are being opened. And now we must show up because a threshold will completely nullify any consideration of what's called the stochastic outcomes, which are the ones that are associated with something that doesn't matter how much radiation you get. It may be a single track because cancer comes from a single cell. It's a cloning effect of a single abnormal cell. Loss of a pregnancy is damage to a single ova. A fertilized ova becomes the early stages of pregnancy, and damage to that cell or ball of cells can happen from an extremely low exposure, one so low you never even knew you had it. So the notion of threshold is the biggest fight on our hands. Don't get hung up on linear. It's the NT, no threshold part that we have to show up and challenge. And then beyond that, I don't trust the Trump guys and gals to be the team to do the right job on the new findings. We're going to have to survive and get hopefully a next team to seriously look at the new data, but don't spend time trying to drag the new data in. Fight threshold. Fight the idea that there's some amount of radiation that doesn't matter. There's some amount of radiation that is not harmful. Kristen's point is absolutely correct. A single track can kill you. Doesn't always, but it can. And I'm so sorry I have to leave, but I have people waiting for me.
Well, thank you for coming and for your comments. That's really nice to see you.
Nice to see all of you.
Okay, now here we are. Dave is up again, and I wrote down Michelle because I think that she might want to make a comment. And a person named Peter Barris has been very active in the chat, and I would like him to introduce himself and tell us who he is and all that. So if Dave and Connie don't mind, I don't know whether, let's call on Peter Barris, and then I'll call on Michelle, and then Dave. So, Peter, could you?
Well, thank you. I did not expect to. Anyway, the VFP Uranium Weapons Group has been doing quite a lot of research, and we've produced a rolling laboratory, which is now in New Mexico, with a mass spectrometry. We work with Michael Ketterer, who did all the research on, for example, Acid Canyon, which is all full of plutonium. But the paper I wanted to mention is something that we put together that attacks the risk model. And we assert that the risk model is so wrong that millions of people have died since 1950 under that calculation. We think that we have the correct one. I'm not sure that we have finalized it, but it's just way too complicated to go into extempore like this. But I'd like to be in touch with Dave and anyone else. So I have put our contact information in the chat, along with a slight blurb on it. We at the moment favor the epidemiology approach, because if you send the kids into the woods and half of them come back dead, there's something wrong with the woods. So the other analogy we have is that if you stand next to a bonfire, you get warm. If you eat one of the coals, you get seriously injured. And that's a analog for the way in which dosage is calculated. They average it out over an organ or a body when the issue is a cell. I'll shut up now because I am terribly inexpert at this.
Do you want to make a comment, Dave?
Yeah, just appreciate you putting the information in the chat, and I will follow up because I'm interested in the work you're doing. So I'll follow up.
Oh, well, thank you. And these risk models have been one of my very pet peeves. We need a standard, not a risk model. And that risk model is an end run around the what's really happening.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
So
we agree, by the way. What we show is that there is no safe level.
right.
And the risk model says there is, and so it's got to go.
Exactly. Thank you. So, Michelle, do you want to say something, or would you rather wait until later?
I'll wait for a minute. I see Kristen raised her hand again also. So
yeah, I just want to speak up in behalf of quantitative risk assessment. I've spent my life doing quantitative risk assessment, mainly in environmental justice communities, and the standard risk model. The standard risk model is that if you're dealing with a child, you're dealing with a multiplicative factor of 10. The child is 10 times more sensitive. And that's true primarily at the lower ages up to age 2, but that's the standard risk model. Interspecies variations, like one human to another, independent of the male-female difference, independent of the parent of the child-adult difference, that interspecies variation factor is a factor of 100. So don't be misled by the bozos who claim they're doing QRA, and what they're doing is greed, not QRA. They're not doing quantitative risk assessment. They're just pulling the wool over your eyes. It's like people who claim that something is cost effective. Almost always, polluters cannot show that what they're doing is cost effective once they have to count the human health costs. So I just don't want us to be in the position of ever rejecting a scientific method, because the people will be very easy, have a very easy job of dismissing us as romantics or idealists or unrealistic people who don't know science. And I don't think we want to go that route. Not that people were suggesting that, but I had to just defend risk assessment because it can save us, even though other people misuse it.
Okay, thank you. So next we have Dave. Go ahead, please, Dave. Dave Kraft.
Caught me off guard there. I'm going to mention something, and I guess I'm looking more for a reaction, but again, I'm asking you to kind of tap into your history and experience with the NRC itself. It was about a month or so ago. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission held a Zoom dog and pony show explaining their rationale for implementing EO 14300. And I'm going on memory here, and I'm glad to say that the person I'm going to reference is still with us tonight. Many of us on the call were on this. But the NRC was asked directly, what has actually changed, in terms of data or whatever, that would get the NRC to move in this direction of reexamination? Has there been some new studies or whatever? The person who actually, I think, brought this up was Paul Gunter as the very last questioner. And if I remember correctly, the NRC's response was, well, the president put out this executive order, which does not exactly meet a very high scientific standard in my book. But I'm curious your reaction about the NRC's reaction to that. And Paul, if I got that wrong, please feel free to tap in, come off mute and correct me.
Well, the fact that it came from the White House makes a difference because earlier in recent months, the president removed Christopher Hansen from the commission, even though his term wasn't up, which sends a very clear message to the other commissioners: do what I say or hit the highway. Some of the former commissioners, Allison McFarland and others, wrote an open letter that's on the NRC's website somewhere saying, you're damaging the NRC's ability to protect the environment and the public by manipulating the NRC. That's the industry's job. That's not your job to manipulate the NRC. So there's pretty clear evidence that the commissioners know what happened to their colleague, know what's sword of Damocles over their shoulders if they don't listen to the guy and play nice until his term is up and the next president comes in and, as Mary suggested, can get. Because if you look at the history of this, 2015, who was the president in 2015? Not Donald Trump. Who was the president in 2021 and the NRC denied it? Not Donald Trump. So the NRC waited long enough to deny the petition and outlasted his 4-year term, first term. So they understand as long as they're on the commission, they can play that game again.
And before we move to the last three questioners, I'm going to give you an opportunity. I'm really pleased to see that we have a lot of newbies on the session here tonight. And I'm not sure how many of them are actually familiar with GRIP. So I wanted to make sure you have an opportunity to explain what GRIP is about. And I put the contact information for GRIP in the chat, which people will get later. So tell us a little bit about that, if you don't mind.
I don't mind at all. In fact, I'm glad you asked me because Mary Olson, who's the founder of GRIP, spoke earlier. And I worked with Mary Olson when I was working with UCS. In fact, for a while, their offices were right next door to UCS's offices in DC. And she and Diane DeRigo and Cindy Folkers were my go-to people on below regulatory concern and other radiation protection issues, because I was a reactor systems guy, not a radiation protection person. So they were my go-to people. When I retired from UCS, I was pleased to accept the nomination to the board of the Generational Radiation Impacts Project, or GRIP. As Mary pointed out, that more and more data is showing that the radiation protection standards, which are based on reference man, which is a 30-some-old white person with a certain diet, and it's not bounding. It's the least affected by radiation. Younger children, females are more affected. And I honestly didn't know that my entire career in the industry and NRC. So when I learned that's what led me to do the study in 2013, contamination. I wanted to understand that aspect better. And working with Mary and Cindy and Amanda Nichols and others, the GRIP people, is expanding my horizon, and also what they're trying to achieve, which is radiation protection standards that equally protect all people, not just 30-year-old white men, is a valid goal. I'm hoping to achieve that. And the reason I did that study was to try to figure out what were the leverage points that led to the 1990 Act and the 20,000 Act that resulted in who were the allies? What were the tactics they used? And could they be used again to help GRIP achieve its outcome? So I'm hopeful. We're not there yet, but it's a worthwhile campaign, and it's not a waste of my time to help Mary achieve that outcome.
Oh, thank you very much. So I want to call on Jackie Dreschler because she hasn't spoken yet, and then after her, we'll listen to Michelle. Okay, so Jackie, would you please unmute and ask your question? Thank you.
Well, sure. I mean, there were two things. One is that there's also another part to all of these undoing of regulations, which is that now nuclear power operators or vendors are going to be able to bypass the NRC, so to speak, and environmental reviews by going through the DOE and the Department of Defense, or what's now known as the Department of War, to get approvals. So that's something that was really concerning. I know it's not actually part of this, but I just wanted to bring that up. And actually, I just also wanted to say that what Paul said on that call with the NRC was eventually, why are you doing this? It's already been decided 3 times. What's changed? And the fellow from the NRC said, that's the easiest question of the night. It's Executive Order 14300. And it's just astonishing because executive orders, from what I understand, are not exactly laws. And so I'm hoping that there's some way around this because it's not exactly a law. They don't have to follow this. And we just have to convince them of that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jackie. Did you want to respond, Dave?
Well, I think it's the role played by the executive order, or in general, or this one in particular. I know some people are contacting lawyers like Diane Curran, who are much better capable to see what the pros and cons of attacking that authority. That's just not my realm. So it seems like an issue. I just don't know. I don't know how to play that card. I guess is basically the short answer.
Thank you.
Okay, Michelle?
Yeah, I think Mary also put her hand up a second ago, maybe in response to Dave.
Oh, you mean Mary Lampert?
Mary Lampert. Did I say Olson? Sorry. Too many Marys.
Do you want to go ahead, Mary? Let's hear what you have to say again.
Yeah, the issue is, to my understanding, the executive order would put into place a rule change. And so therefore, it can have, and also had an end date on when the draft would be issued and then when the final rule would occur, which was in the reign of Trump. And therefore, being a rule change, it would have a life of its own because it takes a long period of time to change a rule. I was just putting that cold water on people's thinking. Am I wrong about that, Dave?
Well, if, for example, the NRC were to go past the target end date in the order, what would the president do? Fire all the commissioners? That would shut down the nuclear industry. I don't think NEI would allow Trump to shut down the nuclear industry. So what if they defy him? They don't know it. The executive order, as Jackie said, it's not a regulation. The NRC has to go through the Administrative Procedures Act to revise a regulation. They can't just do it willy-nilly, not the country music star, somebody else. So that but I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know for sure that that's the way it is, but that's my impression of how the system is supposed to work.
Okay. All right, Michelle, you're up.
Dave, the way the system was supposed to work. Ha 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 ha. Ho ho. Okay, well, that's gone. Okay, so sort of 2 separate points. One, I like the idea that they gave of leverage that might allow people that are working now in the NRC and other areas of government to argue more persuasively than through the pure like public health stuff, which they don't care about. So I would add in fossil fuel workers who are going to be exposed to multiple avenues of contamination, including through fracking. Steel workers who, if these standards go down, same thing with cement workers and so forth. A Department of Defense or Department of War and a national lab workers involved in work with these new types of fuels, which with their enrichment processes and fabrication and so forth are likely to be much more radioactive. Transportation workers, miners, basically the big men who do things. So that's one thing. I would shy away from talking about women because the Trump administration is actually right now as basically defunding any studies scientific studies that have to do with, literally they're doing word searches for the word woman. So I would focus more on children, the developing fetus, young children. So on that area, so now just switching to the other track, which has to do with public health. So two things. One, the focus on DNA, sort of the DNA-centric approach for cancer, that's absolutely accurate, but it's a minuscule fraction of the biological picture. It completely ignores the last 20 years of molecular science, including all the omics, sciences. So putting out the idea that area requires study might get some scientists interested. But the real vulnerability, and I think their Achilles heel is children in the developing fetus, because you have sort of a multiple, bipartisan concern, and that sort of cuts across a lot of different ethical and sort of political frameworks. And that, there the science is absolutely clear, that as was mentioned before, but it's not just damage that's indicative. It's about changing, particularly with developmental disorders. All you need to do is hit the part of the embryo and fetus that's where the brain is developing, and you can have a host of developmental disorders which would not meet, which has nothing to do with any threshold for anything.
Well, first of all, your potential ally, your allies that you listed, like steelworkers and so on. When I worked at UCS, one of the unexpected allies that we found very helpful were unions, labor unions. Like after 9/11, working with the security unions was a good whacking out and so on. The other thing that comes to mind was my Indian Point experience on the Decommissioning Oversight Board. The school across the street was a good ally, a good leverage point. And I'm thinking, if the radiation standards for members of the public are raised up to for workers, the schools within 10 miles of these plants, the children at those schools are going to get more and more radiation. So the parents and others, the school district may not be real happy with that. So perhaps enlisting the Board of Educations, the State Board of Educations, and others similar, because that was very effective at Indian Point in getting attention and making some real changes. So that may be a lesson that can be transported elsewhere. So I appreciate you. I hadn't thought of that until the comments you made triggered my mind. So appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, Dave, it looks like you're really wanting to say something.
Yeah, it was an add-on to what Michelle just said. Obviously, when you raise the radiation standards, you're going to have radiation effects, but you're also concomitantly, you should expect to have non-radiation effects. And I want to bring out the idea of the effects of ionizing radiation on the visual system, which is pretty well hammered home we just passed the 40th anniversary of the Chernobyl disaster. And I want to remind many on the call that 20 years ago, Kevin Camps and his wife, Gabriela Bulashova, were bringing children over from Belarus as part of the Chernobyl Children's Project who were all visually handicapped. It's, I suppose, medically unethical, but I got to see the diagnostic reports that were done by Western Michigan University of the kids who were examined as to their visual handicaps and impairments. And every single one of them said in the concluding remarks, the condition is consistent with the effects of ionizing radiation. So I think where Michelle was a minute ago and the idea of non-radiation effects, we have an opportunity here to discredit the whole concept of changing the standards, because you're really unraveling a much bigger ball of wax here, and not just the radiation component.
I would just say it's still radiation. It's just the non-DNA. It's the non-DNA centric thing. And a lot of it has to do with cellular signaling mechanisms.
Right. Okay.
It is time up. We've been here an hour and a half. And so it's up to Dave if he wants to continue with the questions. There's 3 people with their hand up. And so what do you say, Dave? Do you want to go on, or do you want?
Yeah, I'm able to continue on. I got a note from my dad. I can stay up late today.
Okay. All right. So 2 people have not been called on yet. One is Jake and one is Kathy Barnes. So Jake, can you unmute and ask your question, please? Can you hear us? Jake, you got to unmute.
Yeah,
there. Okay.
Hi. All right. Thank you for your talk. I had a question. My question was, my understanding is that the reason for his executive order is because he wants to allow for the construction of I don't know how many more nuclear power plants around the United States. My question is, if that's the case, who gets to pay for it? Are the taxpayers going to pay for it, or how's that going to work?
That varies across the nation. Most of the funding comes from the company that's building the plant. Sometimes there's state money. It's called construction work in progress. If you're building a 1,000-megawatt plant, you get some money from the state because you're providing electricity to benefit the state. So there's some state subsidies. And right now, DOE is writing checks right and left to subsidize the restart of some plants and the construction of some new plants. But there's not a lot of new takers on the new reactor front. So it's the ones in Vogtle, the two newest plants that started up this century in Georgia were funded largely by the company with a loan guarantee from the Department of Energy. But it's a mix depending on the region of the country and the new versus zombie reactor status.
What does loan guarantee mean? Does that mean they don't have to pay it back?
No, a lot of these companies don't have that much money sitting in their vaults, so they'll borrow money from banks in order to fund the construction of the reactor. Once the reactor goes online, it's generating electricity that allows them the revenue to repay the loans. If they default, because many plants that were under construction never split atom 1 or generated kilowatt 1, so they had to pay off that loan. So the loan guarantee was, if they can't put the plant into operation, provide the revenue to repay the loan, DOE will, or the federal government will step in and cover that.
Oh, so they don't have to repay it. Okay. I just never could understand. So it's a loan guaranteed by the government. That's where the guarantee comes in. Okay. Thank you. Kathy Barnes, what's your question?
Yeah, I just want to interject one thing and then ask a question. I was at when the Chernobyl kids came to the Nuclear Free Great Lakes Action Camp. Corrine Carey and I headed up the Kids Peace Camp, and we had those kids in the camp with American kids. And everyone could see what I saw and how damaged those children were, and the big difference between the American kids that were not exposed to Chernobyl and the Chernobyl kids. There would be no doubt in anybody's mind that nuclear is a bad idea. And the fact that those kids were so handicapped, most of them were basically blinded and or had such horrible vision that they had to be led around. They couldn't really move freely. And they were just struggling. It was so sad. And I was saying to their guide, the woman came along with them, how awful it was that these kids had been so hurt and damaged by radiation. And she said, they're the lucky ones. She said, they're functioning. She says, there's so many that were not even born, and there's so many that are in institutions that have, and she said also that these kids had internal problems, with internal organs as well. Well, my question is, I've read that Trump is heavily invested in profiteering on nuclear power and his family. Is that true? And, I think that's illegal. It's a violation of the Emollients Clause. But I just wondered, how can we find out more about that?
I hadn't even heard that rumor, but I don't follow the president that closely, so I don't know one way or the other whether he's that tight. I'd never gotten the impression that the executive order was self-interest. I think somebody put it in front of him and he signed it. Because he doesn't seem
Yeah.
he hasn't given any talks where it suggested it's needed. So I just never got the impression he was the leading edge of that storm. It was leading edge of that wave. I think somebody else put him up to it.
Okay.
Okay, if you we're on our second round now, so we're going to call on Connie. But Dave, when you get tired, you tell us. Okay. Okay, Connie, go ahead.
Okay, this is real simple because I'm a simple girl.
Excuse me.
And Diane Dorigo isn't on anymore, but she at one point had, I thought, clarified that LNT is a rule or regulation, but ALARA is not. Can you clarify that?
It's the other way around. ALARA is a regulation. The LNT is not a regulation, but the radiation protection standards in 10 CFR Part 20 are based on the LNT model. So they're not a regulation themselves, but they're the foundation for those regulations. Whereas ALARA is specifically in the regulations.
Okay, thank you. And thank you so much for staying and putting on this presentation.
You're all staying too, so it's the least I can do.
Okay, Steve Sondheim, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. So I'm getting clear that the current regulations are stiffer than what is being proposed. Is that correct? And the other part then is, how the heck do you think we can stop what's being proposed? But the current regulations are tighter. Is that correct? Not tight enough, but tighter.
Well, the current regulations for adult nuclear workers are potentially unchanged in the order. The current regulations for the public, workers under 18, and pregnant nuclear workers will be relaxed up to the current standard for adult nuclear workers.
Gotcha. If they pass this, there's still
the other thing
yes.
The other thing this order will do or seeks to do is to do away with ALARA. ALARA says even though the standard for workers is 5 rem per year, if you can take cost-effective measures to reduce that lower, you need to do it. They would do away with that and make everybody could go right up to the 5 rem limit: men, women, children, pregnant women, whoever.
Well, I guess it's my question to everybody. What can we do to stop it? But thank you.
Okay. James? Oh, I'm sorry. I don't want to interrupt you, Dave. Did you have something else?
I was just going to say, I spoke earlier, commenting on an NRC rulemaking proposal when it comes out is one way, but involving states and others to some media coverage would help what I call the Nielsen Ratings Commission do the right thing. So I think, any tool in the tool shed that can oppose this move would be help achieve success.
Okay, and I guess I just want to ask, what is the process for it to be passed? Do they just do it, or do they have to come in front of the public?
Rule change.
Their process calls for publishing a notice of potential or proposed rulemaking, and then to provide at least a 30-day public comment period for members of the public or not members of the public, anybody, including the industry, to provide written comments on that proposed rulemaking, either in favor of it or not in favor of it. At the end of that, the NRC will go through and issue either a thumbs up in why they're going to adopt the regulation, or as they did in 2021, why they're going to deny the rulemaking. So it's a public process, but it doesn't mean the NRC weighs all comments equally.
Okay, thank you.
Could I just say, Mary put in the chat, so it's in there, but they keep moving back the date that they're going to release the draft, and now it's June 11th. Well, I think she said June 24th. The last time I checked, it was June 11th. So once that appears in the Federal Register notice, there will be a 30-day comment period.
The one thing that when I worked at UCS and other groups tried to do, and were successful some of the time, was to ask the NRC to extend the public comment period from 30 days to whatever. That was more often than not, that was not successful, but sometimes it did work. So if they get enough requests to extension, they might extend it to 6. They'll still weigh the comments the same, but they'll just give us more time.
Okay, James Lampert, would you please ask your question?
Two quick questions for Dave. First off, if I understood you correctly, you said that LNT is not part of any regulation.
It's the foundation for the regulations, but it's not itself in any explicit language mentioned.
In other words, if that is correct, my understanding is no rule change would be required for the NRT to abandon LNT. And a second question with respect to ALARA, that has always struck me as, oh, it's nice to read. Are you aware of any instance in which the NRC has used ALARA to force lower radiation emissions?
Yes, I can't cite the specific case, which plant and so on, but when the NRC goes in, well, when a nuclear plant estimates what radiation will be, what their workers will be exposed to radiation when they do jobs X, Y, and Z, when those radiation estimates prove to be too light and workers receive more radiation than anticipated or projected, the NRC has at times forced them, or the plant owner, in order to comply with the NRC's ire at these overdoses, has voluntarily agreed to take ALARA measures to reduce exposures in the future. So it's like once you get caught, you use ALARA to lessen the ticket. As far as the first question, I think you're right. You could abandon LNT, but that's the basis for that's the justification for the regulatory protection standards regulations you have. So it'd be kind of awkward to reject the foundation. And
well, you would just apply a new foundation to those. It would obviously result in higher releases.
I don't think the NRC is smart enough. I think you're outfoxing the NRC.
Actually, unfortunately, I think there are a number of people there that are smart enough.
But they're not
There
in the
are
right
some who
position.
clearly are clearly political and don't think their way out of a paper bag, but there are a number of people, particularly those who have been with the agency for a long time, who are less affected by some of the political winds and might actually do something that they think is right and on a real basis.
That's a good point. I would agree with that.
Thank you. Jackie, go ahead, please. Jackie?
Yes.
Yeah, go good.
Yes, definitely the Trump and or Trump family is invested in nuclear. I can't remember, it was probably about 2 or 3 months ago. There was quite a big announcement that they were buying into a company. So that is true. I was just wondering, I had been under the impression, and maybe it was wrong, that these standards might be released to be even higher than the 5 rems. I mean, I've heard like incredible numbers of the level of exposure that may be allowed. So I was curious about that. And when you mentioned media coverage, Dave, it just popped into my head. We should do some campaign with the workers, like men, protect your women and children. Don't let them be exposed to as much radiation as you're exposed to. You know, it's like, we need to do something like that. When you have so many workers, I know the steel workers are really concerned about this. Steel workers are very concerned. So we do have to find some allies. And that's all I have to say. And thank you so much for this program tonight.
Yeah. Thank you. We're going to call on John Wilkes next. John, could you unmute and ask your question?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm John Wilkes, president of the local Veterans for Peace chapter in Albuquerque. My question is this. We know from studies that military personnel, either the Air Force Rocketeers in the missile silos or submariners in the nuclear submarines, they are really exposed but have not been compensated or recognized by the Department of Defense. Could Dave please talk about, do these standards current or proposed, do they actually apply to military personnel, or does DoD have some kind of waiver or exception? Thank you.
Yeah, I don't doubt that there's potential for high exposure. I just don't know what the limits are for nuclear submariners and others. I'm a one-trick pony focused on the NRC and its rules for nuclear plant workers and the public around those facilities. I just don't know the answer to that question.
Well, thank you for your honesty and the candid response. The other thing I want to ask you very quickly, the U.S. Air Force has refused to disclose to Congress or to the affected military people that have been stationed since 1951 in the Nevada test site. Without the disclosure that their names are associated with being assigned to the test site, they are ineligible for veterans benefits from the Veterans Administration and the Veterans Health Administration. That's a tragedy. Senator Rosen in Nevada's working on it. But do you have any comment on that outrage?
Yeah, I read when I did the research for the contamination report that I issued in 2013. I came across similar stories where the records were there, but they wouldn't be released to the families. And various congressmen tried to, and other lawyers through the Freedom of Information Act tried to get those records. The other thing I got or read that was equally disturbing was the records, even when they're available, were not very accurate. A lot of times they would, if your dose was less than the current limit, it was recorded on the sheet as 0 because you weren't above the limit. Well, it could have been just below the limit, and the next week it'd be so over the time you're getting quite a bit of radiation, but the official record keeps saying 0 because I don't know what they were doing, but they weren't doing accurate accounting. Even when the records were available, they were not as helpful as they should have been. I think it was GAO, somebody did that study that just tore the accounting system apart. And I don't know if it was the best they could do or they just didn't care. I tried to put myself in the shoes at that time. I think I'd have been walking as fast as I could from those facilities if that's what was going on.
Okay, I want to call on myself because when the USS Reagan went into Fukushima on Tomadichi, which was the friendship thing that they did to try to help the people of Fukushima, they sent in a lot of complaints about how being there had affected their health. And the Navy, in defense of itself, said, oh, you're not any worse off than anybody else in the Navy. And they accidentally put out stats about the people who had been in the nuclear Navy. And Chris Busby picked this up and found out that according to, they're trying to avoid compensating the people on the USS Reagan. Chris Busby followed that report, and he found that from their own data, men who had been in the nuclear Navy had as they grew old, had 9 times the cancer rate of the general public. And I put this article by Chris Busby, it was in Counterpunch. It looks like it was in 2020. So you might look in the chat, and if you have any problems accessing that article, my email is janbudar1@gmail.com, and I'll be glad to send that to you. But I didn't want to let this pass without letting you know that Chris Busby did write an article about that.
On a related note, when I was working for UCS, I was contacted by a lawyer representing some of the naval personnel on the Reagan because he was trying to get them compensation for their harm. He had more details on that than I did. I tried to steer him to additional resources, but yeah, I remember it was an issue, and I know he's representing one side, and I didn't listen to the other side, but he seemed to have a pretty strong case that there was harm that needed to be dealt with.
Mm-hmm. And Mary, you had your hand up again. Do you want to say something, Mary Lampert?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
In the past, many decades, when the federal government was being naughty and bad, then I put my focus on the state. And then when the state had a governor and was naughty and bad, then I go back to the federal government or local towns. It seems that there would also be an opportunity at this juncture to go to states. Many states are, swallowing the Kool-Aid about changing regulations if they had it in the state, like we did in 1982, that followed California, essentially not approving any new nuclear reactors unless there were state votes, unless there were reduced levels of radiation, etc. It seems that many in the state of Massachusetts and some other states were opposing getting rid of that law in the state so the governor could get on the nuclear bandwagon by focusing on the voting, democracy. It's anti-democratic, as opposed to focusing, which would tie in here, of, look, states, if you're going to go this route, you've got to have lower radiation standards and effective monitoring than the federal government. It would just be another angle of fighting the states going forward by pointing out, look what Trump's doing. Do you want this for your state? If you think it's going to be safe and not your sale pitch, then the state has to move forward in reducing allowable radiation and explaining the issue of preemption, that it will not be a problem. That was all I wanted to say.
Oh, thank you, Mary. You know, now it is, well, in Chicago, it's 8:55, so it's basically 5 minutes to having been here for at least 2 hours. So I think we're going to have to call it an end. I'd like to give Dave Lochbaum a chance to summarize and have his last comments. And then after Dave, it'll go directly to David Kraft.
Well, thanks, Jan. Circling back to a question that Stephen posed earlier about what can we do, the reason I value this forum for communicating and with increasing awareness and other public meetings that activists have raised is that my experience is that democracy in action works best when it's 3 words and not 2 words. So when the public speaks out, it may be a small voice, but when many people speak out, it becomes a chorus, and it gets heard better by the right people. So I think things like this and acting upon the information that's being shared is the best we can do. It may not be successful, but it's the best we can do to prevent bad things from happening.
Okay, Dave Kraft, I think you need to bring this meeting to a close.
Well, all
back
right.
to you, Dave.
I guess I can do that. Thank you. Dave, I owe you so much for decades of effort that you've put in that I've relied on to conduct the work here at NEIS. And now I owe you extra for overtime tonight. So I'm afraid the debt's never going to be repaid fully, but I want to thank you for just a terrific presentation tonight. It was well attended, and the dialogue was really a cut above in many respects. So thank you so much for being a part of that. Now I'm going to go to a little bit of housekeeping. And if I can get rid of this, there we go. Hang on. There we go. Okay. As you know, Night with the Experts meets the last Thursday of each month and at 7 o'clock Central Time. Next month, I'm really pleased to say that we will have Linda Gunter, who is the director of Beyond Nuclear.
And she's here tonight.
And yes, she was there tonight, and she'll be discussing her new book and perhaps some other topics that we can rope her in on as well. Moving on to June, we have a commitment from Linda Williams-Lavon, who will be speaking on some topics. And in July, July is an oddball. It has 5 Thursdays. So the last Thursday of the month, which is July 30th, is just before the anniversary of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. There has been some discussion so far that we may do something special for that event. We'll keep you posted on it as we move on. Tonight, this presentation has been taped and it will be going up on YouTube, hopefully by tomorrow or the next day. And I want to give a shout out to 2 of our recent acquisitions. Lily Singer, who was on the call here tonight, also worked very, very hard as a co-planner for the International Uranium Film Fest that we just concluded in Chicago. She's been doing prequels of the speakers. So watch for those next month. You'll get 3 or 4 minute teasers of what the presentations will be like, and we want to thank her for doing that. On the flip side of that, the posting to YouTube is the province of Kayla Belknap, who is a recent acquisition for us. And as you can tell by the amount of silver and white hair here, our internet capabilities are in inverse proportion to that. So we're very grateful for Kayla's contribution to get these things up and work with Lily and a third person, Nadia Kauya, who has also been working on transcripts. So we have quite a team working on the Night with the Experts project, and we appreciate you coming to joining us. So watch for the announcements next month, and thank you very much for being a part of this evening.
Thank you all for coming.
Good night. And Dave, if you'd stay with us a few minutes, we'd appreciate it.
Bye. Thank you.